Hello and welcome to MIP TV. And with me, as always, is Bob Cook from the Manchester Institute for Psychotherapy. And
Hi, Roy.
Hi, and we've got a book today that is got a great title. It's at the interface of TA, transactional analysis, psychoanalysis, and body psychotherapy by a really well-known writer in the TA world, William F. Cornell. And it's a brand new book for 2019, Bob.
Yeah, 2019. That's only about 2 months ago.
Yeah. It's brand new on the market. So, what titles you fancy about this tome, Bob?
Well, besides the fact he's a very well-known writer, and I think quite an accessible writer in terms of his, his way that he writes the books and is articulate. So I like that. But what I particularly like about this book, he's taken a selection of his prominent articles, really over the last 20 years, I think. Might be wrong on that anyway. But there's his selection of his prominent articles in transactional analysis and put it in this one book. So you can, at your fingertips, a student of TA has a large selection of major articles over the last 20 years or so by William Cornell. And I would say there's about 8 of those articles in chapters.
Oh, wow. So it's a kind of taxonomy of things he's written and papers he's written.
Yeah.
Do you think it's significant, Bob, that he's mentioned body psychotherapy? The reason I ask that is because there's so much talk now about trauma-informed practice, and part of that is to understand how the brain and the body work in traumatic situations. It just strikes me that body psychotherapy, really started with Wilhelm Reich, didn't it, with body armoring, and has now developed, even though they arrested him because he was a bit crazy apparently. But yeah, they do you think that is a significant?
Yeah, I mean, Bill, he goes back a long time. He must be 70, I don't know what now. And he talks early in one of his articles here about his early life. And he did a TA training, with, I don't think it was Eric Byrne, but someone just after him, and a Reichian training.
Oh, right. So that would be Wilhelm Reich, of course.
Yeah. So he's highly influenced by Reich and highly influenced by a lot of the contemporaries at that time, which would have been the late 60s.
Yeah.
And in this book, he talks about how important the body is in storing early feelings. He talks about the early protocol, in other words, the early experienced decisions at a very young age being held in the body, and how wonderfully important it is to pay attention to the body when you're doing psychotherapy. Just simply when somebody walks in the door, how they sit, their level of agitation, what's going on in the body, as a decoding of unconscious experience.
Yes, so non-verbal communication being a kind of a conscious expression of what's going on subconsciously.
Absolutely. And so he writes a whole chapter about that, which is very interesting. And leading on from what you've just said, which is really interesting, you've just said this, I would say one of the major themes in this book is, and it's in several articles, is the connection between transactional analysis and psychoanalysis. And the way he looks at that is the connecting the vitality of the unconscious with the conscious. So by addressing the unconscious, which is also held in the body, he would talk about, you really help the client with vitality in the consciousness. So he talks a lot about the connection between the unconscious and the conscious in quite a few of his articles. And that's interesting because Eric Byrne, of course, his major thesis really was the ideal of the adult ego state. Whereas when we look at Bill Cornell's writing, which was heavily influenced by somebody called Bolus, who's a psychoanalyst, Christopher Bolus, who wrote a lot of books, one famous book, Shadow Above the Object, which is far more about you need to decode the unconsciousness. So Bolus, Bill Cornell, they talk about the importance of TA embracing the unconsciousness and the early object relations of the parent-child dyad.
Well, when you talk about object relations, you really are in the territory of psychoanalysis, and and object relations. Of course, the Kleinian school is probably one of the most famous.
Yeah, and in fact, in the book, that's very interesting. You must be reading my mind today. In the book, in these articles, he talks about how important Kleinian analysis was, and Christoph Bolus was a student, I think, of the Klein. I don't know if this is true, but Klein comes into it a lot. So we are into the connections of the unconscious and consciousness, and that shows the difference, or if you like, how TA's embraced the different strands of thought and discussion in the last 60 years.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because on the face of it, psychoanalysis and TA are different, but this Cornell seems to be kind of building bridges between them, and certainly with a focus on the unconscious process.
Yeah,
and the childhood experience,
and especially as a chapter on intersubjectivity and non-conscious processes. So it is in that realm, which is quite a long way from, I think, Burns' beginnings, though he really does try and make connections. And one of his articles is about a conversation between a transactional analyst and a psychoanalyst, and looking at where they meet or don't meet. So
it sounds like a fascinating piece of work, and I just wonder. I always ask this Boris question: how will it benefit students if a student was looking at this? What would be the usefulness of Cornell's work?
Well, what I've always been struck at in many ways is and I think it's interesting because when I go into colleges and in the comparative models, and I teach TA, the students often just think of TA almost in the 1960s way of looking at TA. Strength in the adult state, parent, adult, child, the functional model, but they don't really think about the development of transaction analysis. And I think it is a very good book for perhaps the past beginner of perhaps post beginners, more into sort of more advanced, or people who were interested in TA more, to start considering the development of transaction analysis and the embracing of the unconscious into in this century, and how far we've moved, if you like, or evolved from the father's genesis at the beginning.
Yes, it is a wonderful journey, isn't it? Going to different schools, and then the relational turn. I think sometimes people misinterpret TA. They freeze it, and I know I did when I was a student, a tutor. I would teach the kind of 60s version of it. But it's only through talking to you I've realised just how different the 60s version is to the one that's practiced today.
Oh, I think it's remarkably different. You won't find a transactional analyst that doesn't really work with the child ego state, for example. Whereas back in Burns' day, it would be much more about strength of the adult, not looking at the child. So we have a tremendous evolution of transaction analysis, I think.
Yes. So
this book is very important in that aspect for the advanced TA practitioner, or somebody who's interested in the development of TA, to really see a wealth of articles about different aspects of transaction analysis, and especially the unconscious.
Well, William F. Cornell is a well-known and well-respected author in the world of TA. The book we're reviewing is At the Interface of TA and Psychoanalysis and Body Psychotherapy, brand new, 2019. We'll put a link downstairs so you can inspect the book. And if you've read it, why don't you just give us some feedback on it, Bob? I'd love to hear that. And as always, Bob, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.